also sitting in your slippers, but we were talking about the fact that we were both sitting in our slippers to have this conversation with you, because it's just so much more warm and friendly that way. It gives me such pleasure to be in conversation with Shirley this evening, because Shirley is an actress and a writer and someone that I admire greatly as a performer and as a director, writer, and many other things. It's just lovely to have you here, Shirley.
Thank you. As I say, I'm delighted. It's the first date I've had since lockdown, so I'm really happy about it.
The world has certainly changed for us all over these last couple of months. Just about in early March, I was in Germany for an ASSITEJ event. ASSITEJ is the organization for which I'm president. It stands for International Association of Theatre for Children and Young People. And that meeting had been rescheduled from Bologna because it was just as Italy was shutting down. And we all had to move to Frankfurt and have our meeting in Frankfurt. And then I came home via Egypt, which was a whole nother story. But literally, as I was coming back, so international travel was shutting down, countries were closing their borders. And of course, theatres were closing and festivals were being postponed or cancelled. And for us working in the arts field, it really does feel like a different world right now, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's changed everything. But if I just think on the number of colleagues of mine who were out of work overnight, shows that were supposed to have gone from Cape Town to Joburg, Peter Schurin's productions, or other productions. There was a production, a friend of mine, Daphne Kuhn, who runs her theatre in Sandton on the Square. I mean, it's just unbelievable how many people have been affected by it. Fortunately, some of us are able to still continue working. I've been one of those fortunate enough to do other things, so I have been able to earn a living. But overnight, the number of performers, dancers, singers who've just had their incomes cut is quite frightening.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been having conversations with ASSITEJ members from around the world, and we've been having these coffee sessions, we've been calling them, where we all Zoom in different regions. And it's been extraordinary to hear from artists as far afield as Japan, Australia, to South America, to Canada, to all over Europe, of course, all over Africa, Middle East, everywhere, the same kind of experience. I mean, I really think that one of the things that makes this time so unique really is that a little bit like perhaps being in the middle of a war, although it's not the same in many other respects. But we are all going through the same stages of an experience. We have some idea of what that experience feels like. Some of us are in harder lockdowns or, coming out of lockdown. But what's been really interesting is how artists have been able to, in this moment, start to share their experiences, their concerns, and their ideas for ways forward. So that's also been very positive, actually, the fact that we can have this incredible connection that right now we're talking to one another.
I've seen the most incredible productions that have been coordinated on Zoom. I saw one of Chicago. I don't know if you've seen that. Absolutely astounding. All these women in their own lounges or gardens, or they've rewritten it about COVID, the coronavirus. And there are all these individuals performing Chicago individually, and somebody has spliced it all together into a show. It is absolutely wonderful. So, people are being so inventive. And I certainly think those who are more technically inclined I wish I were, I'm not, but they've become so adept at creating a movie out of people who are in completely different locations, so it's really brought out all sorts of talents, other talents of people that we haven't seen before,
Yeah, absolutely. But I think there's also this feeling that we are really missing out. I mean, I don't know if you feel it as strongly as I do, but as much as the digital space is incredibly exciting and there are these new forms emerging, there's also something which is just so sad about not being in the same space with the performers, not feeling that live connection with them. And I don't know when, frankly, we're going to feel that again. I mean, people
No.
are speaking about time frames in this country, and we just don't. Theatres will be the very last to open. So,
I know, it's worrying.
yeah.
When I was chatting to Mary last week, I was just telling her about how our students are coping. Now, they're all studying musical theatre, and normally at this time, we have a huge, big showcase for parents. In fact, it's still happening tomorrow. I will send you the links. If anybody, I'll send it to you. I'll send it to Mary, and you can pass it on to anyone. It's free of charge if anyone wants to watch these brilliant students who act and sing and dance and do tap. And I introduced acting for camera this term because I thought that would be a good one to do while we're all online and are on camera, And these students have taken to it like ducks to water. It's been quite astounding. We've done things like people are living there, or at a doll's house, for example. And we have Nora and Christina talking to each other, like you and I are talking to each other, as if they are in the same room. And there's a scene in it where Nora passes a dress to Christina to sew. So they've both got black dresses, which are neutral, in their apartments. They're trying to make their backgrounds look similar. And they talk, well, won't you just sew this dress for me? I need it to do the dance at Tarantella tomorrow night. And she passes it over like that, and Christina takes it from her, and it looks exactly as if she is taking this object, this prop, from her co-actor. They've just become so inventive and marvelous, and it's really I'm in awe of them all. So I'll send the link to Mary, and everybody can tune in to see their prowess. And of course, they don't all have sprung floors for the dancing, so they've been dancing on wooden dining room tables, and sort of doing tap on wooden boxes, and they've just been marvelous.
So leads us straight into just what have you been doing under lockdown? And I mean, you said at the beginning that although it's been this huge change for everybody, obviously, during this time, that for you actually it's been a very, very busy time, because much of your work you've been able to take online. So tell us a little bit about what you've been doing and how that's
Well, it's interesting, Yvette. I actually, my husband's so sick of the S word, he calls it. I broke my shoulder just after lockdown. So I wouldn't have been able to go in and teach. I wouldn't have been able to climb up those 3 flights of stairs. I broke it in 3 places, and I sprained my wrist and my elbow and my thumb. My dog dragged me down a flight of stairs. And I was really in quite a bad way. It's the first time tonight I'm not wearing my sling. I thought I'd dress up and not wear my sling tonight. First time in 7 weeks. So I really would have battled. I was also assigned to write on a TV series just before lockdown, and I really didn't want to miss out on it, because this thing's been, it's sort of lurking in the background for about 5 years, and then somebody finally bought it and has taken it on and commissioned the writers. And it would have broken my heart if I hadn't been able to work on it. So I got a computer. Fundi, he's somebody who fixes my computers, this brilliant computer man. And I asked him to introduce, there's so many different ones, but the one he introduced me to was something called Speech Script. And you dictate, and your computer types automatically whatever you dictate, which is quite marvelous. But I just couldn't work with it. Firstly, our script's very South African, and there are so many phrases that, it just doesn't accept, like, I can't even think of one, but yes, like it. this is somewhere not lekker, something like that. So there was just, and then we would type the most bizarre things, Then I would have to go back and correct them and hope that I was correcting them. So I just gave up, and I'm doing it all with one hand now. My one hand typing is becoming quite good. Yeah, so I've had the script writing. And then our teaching just continued full-time with our marvelous young techno-savvy directors of the theatre school, Lambda, who have managed to, we've either taught on WhatsApp, if we have one-on-ones, they're on WhatsApp, up to 2 people. Today, Friday, well, yesterday, for the whole week, we've had 30 people on WhatsApp watching everybody else's exams. And, it's just been quite an astounding experience. So interesting.
So how does it feel to be teaching students online rather than in person? And particularly for something like the theatre, which is so embodied, it's so much about physical presence, using the voice, using the body. How are you working with that in the online space?
It's a bit of a problem. They're all projecting for film. Everything we've taught them about voice, not all of them, but immediately, because they're this close and there's a microphone right there, they speak like this. And we're encouraging them to project for stage, because apart from the acting for film task, the other tasks are for the stage, but they just automatically they drop their volume for film. And then as far as staging goes, it's been virtually impossible. I mean, we've had them standing up, and some of them, they come in, they make an entrance, and then they either stand and talk to each other, or they sit and talk to each other, or they wander around. But, I've had to direct them to only wander around backwards and forwards and not sort of, not across the screen. So we've lost out a whole dimension of that. We asked them all to make stage floor plans and show us their proposed blocking for next term, hoping that we might be able to do this live. But I mean, who knows? None of us know when we will ever be able to do anything live again. They've adapted marvelously, but it has been a battle, and our biggest battle has been trying to keep the size of those performances so that they could actually, they've got to be, they're trained to perform at theatres like Artscape. These are students who want to do big stuff, not little one-on-ones, not even performing in tiny theatres like the Alexander Bar. They want to do the huge, big stuff, the 600-seater theatres. So, yeah, that has been a battle, and they're just forgetting about what we've taught them about voice, but they're trying hard, and they are marvelous. They've come up with some fantastic little scenarios and some brilliant, just brilliant inventions about, in one of the scenes, people are living there, which is, I'm sure people will know, it's Athol Fugard. The sissy takes her lipstick and writes on her boyfriend's forehead. And I mean, that was going to be impossible. So she just took the lipstick and sort of went towards him with the lipstick. And then we cut, and then we picked it up, and he had it all over his forehead. So we just all these tricks. He had to get somebody to quickly write "bad boy" on his forehead. But it has been a challenge. And as I say, I'm in awe of all these students. They're so wonderful.
So tell us a little bit about LAMTA, because it's a relatively new school, and I'm sure there are people who don't actually know what it is or where it is or how it came into being.
It's a musical theatre school. LAMTA stands for Leighton Alexander Musical Theatre Academy, and I am very proud to say that Leighton is one of my ex-students from Stellenbosch University. You must always be nice to your students. I can't tell you how many of my students have employed me over the years. I think, oh, thank God, I wasn't mean to that one. And they have been doing all the huge musicals that we've seen, so many of them. Annie and Evita and Matilda was their last one. They toured all over Asia. And they've actually been doing, for the last 5 years, most of their work has been touring, especially in Asia. And they both got exhausted. They became exhausted, and one of them hates Asian food, and he just said that was one of the reasons he wanted to give it up. He just said if he sees another meal that he's got to eat with chopsticks, he just wants a good roast beef and Yorkshire pudding. That's Dwayne, and then his partner Anton has. Dwayne is a choreographer and beautiful dancer, and Anton is an actor and mostly a singer and the most astounding musician. He is absolutely brilliant. So the two of them are putting all their talents, the combination of their talents is just what a school like this needs. And then they've employed other people to teach things like acting and voice and tap. And I'm actually working with colleagues. It's so interesting. The director of the play that we were supposed to be doing right now for the Feyenoords Festival, I think on Monday we were supposed to be doing it, Chris Weir is actually my colleague at LAMTA. So, we work very well together, and we're so familiar with each other. We think eye to eye. And then the other acting teacher and voice teacher is another colleague of mine, Jackie Singer. And we have worked together on the stage for about, I think, 40 years. I'm giving our ages away. No, not quite 30, about 30, yeah. So we're all very close to each other, and it's just such a joy, it's such fun to be working with like-minded people. And we both, Jackie and I both still perform every now and then. It's very hard. It's all these gorgeous young things who want to go into the theatre. I would never discourage anyone, but I just say make sure that it's got to be something that you couldn't live without. It can't be a career choice that you feel fairly attracted to. You've got to want it with such passion, because it takes so much out of you, and it is so hard all over the world, not just in South Africa. It's just very hard to get parts, and especially theatre. There's much more television work. That's in South Africa, television is the biggest employer of actors in our country. But it's just about all up in Joburg too. So for the Cape Townian actors, it's not really an option, and many of them have had to move up to Joburg because they just haven't been able to survive down here. It's a hard profession, but very rewarding.
And I think also particularly hard in our context where we don't really have permanent companies for actors, so there are very few opportunities to be in a company, to be permanently employed. That just doesn't really exist in South Africa. Obviously, in many other parts of the world, they are. I mean, I've visited theatres in Russia and in various places where they have 150 people on their staff all of the time, and all of those people are employed. They're working in new plays, or doing educational programs, or doing some kind of involvement right the way through the year. So I think that the South African context is particularly challenging.
Absolutely. When I finished at drama, did my training at UCC, and there were we had 4 provincial companies at that time, and I actually wasn't accepted initially, and I was astounded. I just couldn't believe it. I've been training for 3 years. I thought I would just walk in and get a permanent job. I was shattered that I didn't get into one of the companies. Well, it was only actually one at that stage, the Pact from the Transvaal. That was the only one that gave you a permanent contract. KPAP they started offering contracts a little bit later, as did NAPAC, and SWAPAC was in Namibia, and the one in the OFS was PACOFS, yeah. So, but at that stage, PACT was the company to get into. And I was devastated that I wasn't accepted. And then it was actually such a boon. Along came a guy called Henry Goodman, who's now very well known. You would have seen him in numerous BBC, especially detective stories. He usually plays the baddie, so he's usually the criminal or the murderer. Most wonderful actor. He and his wife, Susie Parker, were our movement teachers at UCC. And Henry was a director. He trained at LAMDA in England. And he started his own company. There were 6 of us, 6 leftovers, the one that hadn't been accepted by that. And oh my word, it was such a rich, wonderful experience, because he had all this international experience that none of us knew about. And we started doing, at that stage in 1977, we didn't call it theatre sports, we just called it improv theatre. But we started doing what they now call theatre sports. And we would go up and down the gardens, the company gardens, and we would just put on a play and grab somebody from the audience and make them become involved and do theatre games with them, and then put out our hat. And then we would do a real play, beautiful, wonderful text, an Irish play, and we'd travel off we were a travelling company without transport, so we used to catch trains. But it was the most wonderful, wonderful experience. And then the following, in about, I think it was in the April, I think somebody dropped out of PACT, and then I did get a call, and then I was with the company for 2 years. I was very lucky. Then I had a break, to have babies and get married, and then I went back for another 2 years again. And it was such a luxury, you know, to do those classical plays, not to even worry about where your next job was coming from. You would just be, you know, we would do a Shakespeare, then we would do a Chekhov, then we would do an Italian play, then, you know, Dario Fo, or an American play. Oh, it was just, I didn't realize at the time how lucky we were. We took it so for granted. We never stopped complaining, you know. Like, they expect us to rehearse in the daytime and then perform at night. I mean, we're all so exhausted. I mean, if only we could do that now, we'd love to, you know. So, yeah, it was wonderful. But, I mean, of course, it couldn't last. It was a very expensive exercise, and a lot of people felt, you know, towards the end of my stay there, it certainly became multiracial. But initially, it was purely white, because everything was purely white at that stage. But yeah, at the Space Theatre with Henry Goodman, we broke the rules. The Space, from the word go, just refused point blank to make it. You know, they just allowed anybody in. So, you know, that was also gosh, I'm going back so many years. I can't believe it, so many years ago now. But it was, and then when I came back to Cape Town, I worked at the Space again for quite a long time. It was just, it was a marvelous institution. I'm still in touch with some of the people who started it. One of them sadly died this year, Brian Asprey. He was Yvonne Bryceland's husband. And what they did for theatre, those two, was quite remarkable. So, yeah.
Plays that came out of the Space were absolutely extraordinary and really important in terms of our history, I think. And also, as you say, the kind of environment that was created that really showed the way forward to a multiracial democracy, you know, way ahead of its time.
Yeah.
Really, really important place.
It was closed down on a number of occasions. You know, the police would come knocking at the door and everybody would scurry and there'd be nobody there, and it was all terribly, you know, it was quite exciting. But they persevered and they kept it going for years. You know, I think it carried on for about at least 10 years. You know, it was a remarkable time.
Yeah. I think in some ways that company spirit is still felt, perhaps the only place it's still really felt today is in those long-running musicals. You know, you were talking about the kinds of musicals that Andre and his partner have been doing and that have led to them starting the school. Some of those musicals are, you know, they need to obviously enlist a big company, and then the company goes on the road, and you can be in Matilda or whatever it is for a year and a half, 2 years, you know, or longer sometimes. And so that you really do get that sense of the company spirit of working together on a daily basis, and of course having long-term employment. I think the questions now, though, is in this time and with international travel, you know, so shut down, when will we be able to see that kind of touring happening again? And it's such a mainstay for many, many actors. They've got that tour to Asia. You know, that really means that they're able to look after their families, and it's quite worrying if you think about it.
It is.
Be there for a long time.
It is, yeah. It's a worldwide problem. I mean, it's just Manhattan dark. You know, it's inconceivable. So yeah, it's. I think performers everywhere have just taken a huge knock, but performers are very inventive, and they, you know, people do start finding other outlets. Another good friend, Lenita Crawford, who was supposed to be doing Gertrude with me on Monday, she's a newsreader and an excellent newsreader. So her, you know, she's now lucky enough to have a permanent job with one of the radio stations. I'll not plug them, but she has a permanent, regular income with medical aid and leave, and excellent newsreader. And her agreement was that if ever she did theatre, she could just take unpaid leave to do so. So, you know, we all have to have many strings to our bows these days to try and survive.
Yeah. How do you imagine theatre coming back? I mean, it's a conversation I've been having with so many people. And, you know, for example, one of the things that is happening as some parts of Europe start to open up is that more and more people are looking at big outdoor performances where the audience can be at some distance from the action and where things can happen at quite big scale, so that people can view from a distance. And then, you know, they've also been in the theatres that are opening now in Germany, there have been all kinds of restrictions that have been put in place. So no audiences bigger than 30, even in a 500-seater, you know. So,
Gosh.
yeah. So it has huge financial implications, of course, but also implications, I think, for the way we experience theatre, because theatre is so much about being in that space together, breathing together, you know, laughing together, hearing one another's responses to things. One of the things which I always love is a piece of theatre where I can also see the audience. So, you know, if something is in traverse or in the round or something like that, and I see other people watching, and my own experience is kind of heightened by that awareness of the audience around me. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens to the shape that theatre takes as we start to go back.
Yeah, we've been chatting about it, and we have wondered if the theatres can continue to survive. I mean, one has already closed down, the Court Bay Theatre. They're also actually colleagues at LAMTA, and they just couldn't sustain it. They couldn't continue to pay the rent and the electricity and the staff, and it's just gone for good, sadly. They do want to revive it in some form or shape eventually, but in the meantime, they were simply unable to keep it going. But you know, for the larger theatres like the Baxter, which I think, I know nothing about their finances, but I think that they probably have reserves, as I'm sure Artscape does. We were saying the other day, why can't we, if they allow us to, why can't we do what they're doing in Germany and allow, you know, in the 600-seater at the Baxter, allow 30 people in, or, you know, or 100 even, and you just make sure that, you know, that only 1 in 5 seats around you is occupied. I mean, it will be quite a different experience. And then the other thing we were saying, well, if you bring your spouse along and you've got your marriage certificate, can you sit together, you know, and have a circle around you? You know, so at least you can have some company if you actually are already living with someone. But maybe we will do that. And then, of course, there's beautiful Kirstenbosch Gardens. I mean, that would be the ideal place if people were just responsible and kept their distance from everybody else. And, you know, those kind of concerts, I'm sure, could continue. But it's all very complex and all ponderable. And it's just, at the moment, one-man shows, televised or filmed on YouTube, seem to be what most of my friends are doing, and I really applaud them. I don't have any desire to do that. I just haven't got the energy or the do a Shakespearean monologue. I just feel it's very far from from one of my desires at the moment. I don't feel there'd be enough people interested. So many of my friends are just doing them because they simply want to perform, you know, and they'll do a comedy sketch. They don't expect to be paid for it, or they will do a Shakespearean verse, or they will read some poetry, or the musicians have you know, they've been recording themselves beautifully and going onto YouTube. Most of them free of charge. Some are charging. And it's just that, you know, no matter how old you are, that desire to perform never leaves you. So I think it's hard for a lot of people. Yeah.
Also, how these kinds of performances have shifted our sense of who artists are in a way. You know, so these one-person shows you're describing, or the musicians who we see at home now sitting at their own piano playing to us from their living room, you know, you suddenly have such a different sense of who this person is.
Yeah.
It's not just the performer who comes out in that very professional way with their stage persona that you might see in the theatre. You're seeing a little window to who they are as a personality, what they hang on their walls, what they who their family is in some instances, you know, what their home looks like. And so I think there's an interesting dynamic there as well about how this has also made some performances very much more personal. You know, there's this real sense of a personal connection to the person because of the use of Zoom and the way it kind of takes us into people's homes. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that when theatres start to open up again. You know, are we going to have a lot more kind of personal contact between people who before seemed to be quite impenetrable on the stage? You know, are they going to reveal more of themselves to us, or will they go back to being just the stage persona who comes out, plays the part? And
It's quite interesting. I've already been thinking of productions that we could easily do. We did this, in fact, this very colleague, my Jackie Singer, and I did a play called Mary Stuart by an Italian playwright. You know, Dacia Maraini. And there's Elizabeth and Mary are the only two people in the play, and they're two handmaidens. But there was no contact at all, no physical contact, no talking to each other. They spoke about each other and they had fantasies about each other. But the stage was literally divided in half, and Mary had her half and Elizabeth had her half, and their handmaidens did get a bit close. We had our feet massaged and that sort of thing, which we probably had to cut out. But I just thought that's a play that really would be perfect for this situation, where, you know, the actors have no physical contact with each other whatsoever, are in their own spaces, and it's also the kind of play that is perfect for a small audience. So, you know, I'm sure I've invented these people who are inventive. I would actually love to direct that play with younger actors now and stage it. It's firstly just a brilliant feminist piece of writing, wonderful, very ahead of its time, but that's one that would not, you know, you could do that without having too much physical contact with the other performers.
Yeah. And how coming back to LAMTA for a moment and your students, I'm just thinking about dance, which is obviously such a very physical activity, and generally, you know, there is a lot of contact in dance. How are people dealing with the dance classes at this point? Obviously, the people are working alone, I assume.
They're doing it all on their own, in their bedrooms, just like we're sitting in our bedrooms or studies. And as I said, they are marvelous. I was just reading, we were going through the reports today, and, you know, the teachers are being quite harsh on these poor students, saying, well, you know, your point's fine, but you've got to keep on working on X, Y, and Z. And I'm thinking, this poor person is doing it on his dining room table. His camera perched up on a couple of nails on the opposite wall, but they're keeping their standards high and they're making demands. But it's I think for the students, a lot of them have said they found it so hard, especially those who live on their own. There are quite a few who have come from out of town. You know, their parents are in Joburg or Namibia or Pretoria, and so they live entirely on their own. They're not allowed out. They don't, you know, socialize with their friends as they normally do. And then all the work that they do is entirely on their own in their apartments. So I've been so full of admiration. You know, I had one of my younger students cheating, and she just couldn't find an appropriate costume for Nora in the doll's house. And then she said, "Don't I have something?" I knew that she lived in Hart Bay, where I live, and I said, "You know what? I can lend you a few things." So she pretended she was on her way to Woolies. I won't mention her name, don't want to get her into trouble. And she swung by my place, and I had this bag of costumes which I put outside my front door, and she came with her mask, and I had my mask on. We didn't go anywhere near each other. Cheers. She said, "Thank you very much." So, but you know, they don't, when they move down from leave home, they haven't got the kind of resources to create a period costume in their flats, you know, where they normally wear a tracksuit or leotard for their dance classes. So it's been quite interesting, and they've been very inventive. We had tea passed over today as well. Somebody would make a cup of tea, and you know, they'd pass the tea over, and remarkably, the person who took the tea had a very similar teacup, you know, and started drinking. I love it. They really are a most talented and hardworking and such a resourceful bunch of people, but talented. They have such talent. We've put on about 5 productions since I've been there, And people have just been knocked out. They've all been able to play at Peter Turin's Theatre on the Bay, which is a great privilege, for young students to perform in that professional space. And we've had dance productions and singing productions and straight theatre, musical productions. They really are. I think they're very stringent with their admissions, and so there isn't a single student who is admitted who doesn't have all three of those triple threat skills. They can all sing and dance and act.
Yeah. And have there been issues around accessibility in the sense that, data is expensive? You teaching on what? Zoom, on Google Classroom?
We teach on WhatsApp and Zoom.
Yeah. So it uses data, it needs Wi-Fi, all these things. Have those been issues for students?
I don't know. I haven't dealt with anything like that at all. They've only been, I actually complimented them all today. I just said, not one of you was 1 minute late for class. They stood by, and our poor LAMTA directors, they were literally working out 12-minute classes for every single person in LAMTA, because instead of having a big 3-hour, 2-hour session, or sometimes a 3-hour session the whole morning for dance, every individual had to have his or her allocated and equal time slot. And literally the times would be at 14:02. You got it at 14:02 on the dot. My phone would ring or Zoom would click in, and they would be there. So there are these two directors, Anton Layton and Dwayne Alexander. They've instilled such a professional attitude in this group of students. They don't tolerate anything like unpunctuality or not learning lines or just not giving you all. So really, I know I'm going on and on, but I've taught at every institution in the Western Cape. I've taught at APTA, I've taught at UCT, I've taught at Stellenbosch, Wales, I've taught at so many places. This is a very different area for me because I'm not a musical theatre performer myself, so it's a whole different world for me. But I've really enjoyed it thoroughly.
Yeah, that's
we just long may it continue.
Yeah, and just coming back to this idea of theatre going digital, what do you think? Are there particular things you mentioned earlier, the Chicago, that really excited you? Are there things that you're seeing technically that are interesting for you and that maybe might transfer back to the stage in some way? That when we do go back to live, we might have learned something from this time?
Well, I also saw a most amazing dance program from the Johannesburg City Ballet. And it was also shot in a very, very similar fashion to the Chicago, which was American. And I don't know who shot these pieces, but I should imagine that somebody said, you will all do a dance piece to such and such a piece of music. Can't remember what the music was now. And so there were all these individual ballet dancers doing dances. Some were walking along the tops of their walls, some were swinging from trees, some were just doing a conventional dance inside. And it was cut together so beautifully. It was so moving. I'll send both these links to you, the Chicago one and the Joburg City Ballet one. I thought they were just wonderful. The theatre things that I've seen have been, as I say, mostly monologues and mostly comedy monologues. And I just think it's the hardest thing in the world to do a comedy when you've got no audience. There's no feedback, television, you don't have that audience either. And it is hard. You don't know when the punchlines are going to actually raise the laughs or not. So you're working in the silence, and it's very, very hard to do television comedy as well. But theatre comedy, I think, is really hard without an audience.
Yeah, it is. And also theatre for children, which is obviously the area that I come from. Theatre for children, there's so much engagement and interaction. It's really hard when you can't see and hear your audience. But one of the things that we've been doing is taking storytelling live on Facebook. And what's great about that medium is that even though we may not be able to hear the audience's response, parents or children, if they're old enough, are able to type in responses and send little emojis. And one of the things that we've been doing with the storytelling is getting the children to give themselves names, so they can be a superhero name, or they can, have some other kind of name that they'd like to call themselves. And then the storytellers actually engage directly with the children using those names in the process. And we get these wonderful responses afterwards from parents saying, "Oh, her eyes just lit up when you said her name, and she was so excited."
Yeah, that's gorgeous.
I think one of the tricks perhaps is this idea of, if we are needing to do things digitally, how do we retain some element of that liveness in some way, shape, or form? Whether it's around having a conversation and allowing people to ask questions afterwards, or whether it's about, using things like the Facebook Live medium, where people can comment or respond. Somehow that seems to shift it a little bit out of that very dead space where you really just like you acting to a blank wall.
Yeah. Yeah, you're starting to make me think, Yvette. I was just thinking that this play, this Gertrude Stein, which isn't going to happen anytime soon again, but also that's also a two-hander where we literally live in different worlds, because Gertrude Stein is dead at the beginning of the play. So it's her ghost that appears, sometimes in the body of the story and sometimes outside the body of the story. But I was just thinking, we could probably do that. Get ourselves, if we could get the wigs would be a bit of a problem, but I'm sure we can. I have a friend who works at UCT drama department. I could probably scrounge one from her. There are ways. You've made me think. I'm going to speak to our director and see what he thinks about doing a Zoom version of Gertrude Stein. If we can have a platform like this, invite people to come on a Friday night, it might be quite fun. It'll keep us on our toes, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, there's something lovely about that, about being able to continue to practice your craft at a time when everything is shutting down. So,
yeah.
So find the right medium, it's worth exploring. And do you think, we were talking just before this conversation started about models for audience payment. Do you think that you'd be able to get audiences to pay to see Gertrude Stein on a Friday evening? What's your feeling about that?
I think if we did that, it would have to be a full, we can't do it in our studies, I don't think, maybe just in a neutral space. I could find a blank wall. We could both be in a blank, perform against blank walls. But that particular production relied so much on other things. There was music that was like a third character in the play. And then there were all these wonderful visuals on the back wall of that time over the 33 years that they were together, these wonderful Parisian and American, and it was all about the artists that they dealt with, so Picasso's and Matisse's and all those there was such beautiful artwork that featured very strongly. So it wouldn't be the same production, it would be very difficult to do something like that. I wouldn't think of charging, but it might be just an interesting experiment, and just do it for the fun of it. I would like to be directed, but our director is so brilliant. He could be the third Zoom character. He could give us our notes and tell us we're being too big or too small. That's an idea.
Yeah. Well, I think that the idea of, finding ways for people to earn money at this time is obviously really important to sustaining the industry. So we have quite a lot of discussions in the South African context around, well, how can we support artists right now? And is it possible for people to earn money from online gigs? And there's a new South African Theatre on Demand, which is a streaming service which will allow people to buy tickets through, I don't know whether it's web tickets or CompuTicket or whatever, which has just started. And of course, I think from the 25th of June, we're going into the virtual NAF, which will be really interesting to see what.
Oh, yes, I was looking at the program today. Yeah, Right.
And, you know, so
Very interesting.
and there they're using a model of some things you pay for, and some things come for free, and you can get a kind of a day pass, as I understand it. You can then see a whole lot of things that have happened during the course of that day. And I think you can also select individual events. But it's all uncharted territory, so it's going to be very interesting to see how people respond to this. And while I certainly, you know, I don't think it compares to live theatre, I have a bias, but I do think that there is something of interest in many of these offerings. And certainly, you know, if it can give us a different perspective on either the artists behind the work or an interesting way of presenting the work, you know, I think it's still worth doing. And certainly if it can support artists to make a living, we really do need to find ways. Right now, there are so many artists who are really struggling to put food on the table.
Yeah.
As a result, there are a lot of issues around relief grants right now, and other sort of mechanisms that are being created to try and support artists in different ways. But it really is dire, actually.
Yeah, I was looking at the program, and I've really earmarked a couple of the things that I do want you to see. It'll be very interesting to see how that unfolds. I think it's so brave of them to have taken it on. I mean, it's huge. It's a big enterprise, you know, big initiative that they've taken on, and I'm so glad it's still going ahead. So it's a world that you know, when you were talking earlier and saying it's almost like a war, the one thing is that we're all on the same side, you know. You know, we're all sort of, the enemy is this COVID-19, and we're all fighting it and sort of supporting each other against it. So at least there's that. It has drawn, it's been so interesting. We live in a complex state in Hart Bay, and it's actually, I've met people that I didn't even know lived in, you know, 2 houses down from me, because we all now take our dog. I don't actually. My husband now takes the dog for a walk. I'm not taking her for a walk for a long time. But we all walk our dogs around the complex, and there are these gorgeous little kids who are able to play with each other. Fortunately, we allow them to. I know in some complexes they won't allow them to mix with each other, but there are about 10 little kids who are fabulous. I've even had I had one bringing me a card and a present when I broke my shoulder, and somebody, you know, he's now only asked his mum if he could have a play date with me, sort of thing. And it's different. We're living in a completely different world, and as I say, we're all on the same side. We're all sympathizing with each other. Nobody's got anything to do on a Friday night, you know, so we gather outside, and sometimes we haven't done it, but I see people who are next door neighbors having a glass of wine, not close to each other, but, you know, raising their glasses and sort of enjoying a glass of wine with their neighbors at a safe social distance. So it's a very different world we've entered into.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of the things that has been so heartening about this time, is how people have really come together and found ways to connect. And, you know, things like the community activation networks that have been created, where you know, people from suburbs have come together to support one another, but also often pairing up with township areas, working in those areas for feeding schemes and all kinds of things that are happening. It feels like a kind of activism in South Africa right now that I don't remember feeling since the 80s, in a way, you know. People are really coming together in a very wonderful way. But I have to say that where I would slightly sort of rephrase what you've said is that while we're all on the same side, we're certainly not in the same context. You know, use the World War analogy. I mean, there are some people who are really in the trenches right now, you know, and who are really suffering through this period. And there are others who, you know, like myself, I'm sitting here in my lovely study where I
can roofs over our heads. Yeah, I know.
And I mean, that context, or those multiplicity of contexts are, you know, just so varied across the world. In all these conversations, all these coffee sessions I've been having with artists in different places, that's become so clear that
Mm,
can't
mm,
presume to understand what someone's context is, even though we may be going through a very similar time and we may have some of the same
mm,
challenges.
mm,
Um,
mm,
the particularity of it for
mm,
them
mm. Yeah,
is
no, I know. If I think about, as I say, this very safe world that I'm in our little estate, and the very safe space I'm in, teaching on Zoom. And if we do think, I mean, in Hart Bay particularly, just literally a stone's throw from where I am, there are people who are in this kind of weather, in the kind of weather that we had 2 days ago. You just wonder how on earth they're coping. Not only because of COVID, I mean, just in general. But so many more people are losing work that it's becoming, it's just becoming more difficult for people to give as much as they used to. And of course, crime is increasing because people are losing their jobs. And oh dear, it's just, just a bit of a vicious cycle.
Yeah, and then it also brings me to think about the role that the arts can play in times of trauma and in times of distress, because I think that what we've seen, if you think back to those incredible scenes in Italy when, the virus had really hit and the cities had closed down, but people came out on their balconies to sing together.
Yeah.
We all turn to the arts in some way, shape or form in times of stress, in times of trauma and suffering. And how do we make sure that wherever people are in our country right now, that they can have access to that? I really applaud the efforts of, for example, Butterfly Arts Project, which is an NGO that works in Fregrond, the township that our artists are in.
Yes, which I've been to, yeah.
Yeah. Butterfly Art Project has been doing an amazing project around getting out 4,000 sets of art supplies to children who are stuck at home in the townships.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and I think it's just made such a difference to those children. And we've been working on creating activity packs. It's called the Treasure Box Project. And we've been creating a treasure box of activities that come in a kind of a beautiful color cover, which doubles up as a board game. And then inside are black and white pages with lovely characters who tell you little rhymes and lead you into creative activities and ways to play at home and be safe. And, sort of there's a COVID kind of thing. And when we started the project, we thought we would only be doing about 10,000 of these. We're now, I think, are at 60,000, and they're translated into, they're in isiXhosa, Afrikaans, isiZulu, Sesotho, Sepedi, English, of course, and it's taken off, and more sponsors are coming on board and asking for material. So, yeah.
Oh, that's a lovely positive aspect. Thank you for telling me that. That's wonderful. Yeah, I know.
I think it's what we all need to think about, actually, is how can we contribute this time, and particularly as artists, how can we contribute in our own way?
Yeah, apart from this blooming accident, I was going to join an initiative with which another friend of mine is running called Ladles of Love. I don't know if you've heard of that. And it's literally just making sandwiches. They churn out, I don't know how many thousands of sandwiches every single day, and these sandwiches get transported. And I was only too happy to be part of that. But as I say, I've just been man down for a few weeks, but I'm getting there. So, first day I haven't had my first evening I haven't had my sling on, but those kind of initiatives are so important to just people. There are just so many people who need so much more than we do. Yeah, it's not only about the artists. There are just people in dire need in our country. Yeah.
While you're thinking about your questions or comments, one of the things that Mandy said, really struck me about this whole issue of access. And she was describing the artist in, a rural province somewhere who doesn't have access to data and is trying to somehow make a living. And it's a strange dichotomy right now, because on the one hand, there's far greater access than ever before because people do have cell phones, and the smartphone is becoming a cheaper and more accessible kind of item for people. And so on the one hand, we have access to people who perhaps we would never have met ordinarily. Some of our online events are attracting huge audiences internationally who would never be able to come to Fine Arts, for example, or to the National Arts Festival. You know, suddenly you've got people there from all over the world because it's online. So on the one hand, there's this huge opening up of access, but then on the other, there is this very real issue around the rands and cents of affording that. And I think it's one of the things we need to look at in terms of our budgeting. You know, and that certainly the government and organizations like the National Arts Council and anybody else who is funding artists really needs to be thinking about how to make data more accessible, you know, how to make sure that people have access to Wi-Fi. It really is becoming a human rights issue.
And thanks, Yvette. It was so wonderful.
No, thank you very much. It's been a lovely evening.